Hello and welcome to your video for class for October 4th. So as we discussed last week, I am out of town this week, but I do not want us to miss a whole week of lecture by canceling class. So the next best thing I can do is create a video for you so we can still get some lecture in, make sure you're caught up on your assignments, you know what's due for the following week, and still cover some material. So we're going to go ahead and get started. By now you should have completed all of the required reading in Chapter 5. So now we have Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all done and over with in the textbook. Right now you should still be working on that take-home quiz if you haven't finished it. Remember, I assigned a take-home quiz last Tuesday. That's all the vocabulary terms. It's going to count as Quiz 2 and Quiz 3, so please spend some time on it. Make sure it's exactly correct so you can get 100 on both of those quizzes. Remember, you're just taking the vocabulary terms as they're defined either in the course slides or in the course textbook and putting those definitions on a typed piece of paper. So it'll be probably the easiest assignment you get all semester, so please take advantage of that. Get a really high score on both and lock down those two quizzes. You must print that take-home assignment and turn it in when we return to class live next Tuesday, which is October 11th. Plus, you're going to get a few assignments tonight that will also be due on October 11th. We're going to go over some reminders, some scheduled dates, the transfer fair, quick note on the midterm and class projects, and then we're going to finish up the material from Chapter 5. So let's go ahead and get started. So our upcoming schedule. So this week, October 4th, you're watching this video. That counts as your attendance and participation. You need to watch this video by Tuesday at 9 o'clock. So just pretend you're going to class and make sure that this video is complete by Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Next week, when we return live, you're going to turn in your take-home quiz. You're going to turn in the other assignment that's going to be discussed tonight and due next week. You're going to get another assignment. We're going to do a lecture, and you're going to get your midterm exam study guide. And then I'm not going to assign any reading because you're going to be studying for the midterm exam. So next week when you come, you need to bring your take-home assignment, that take-home quiz. You're going to need to bring Project 3, which is going to get signed tonight. On October 11th, I'm going to assign you Project 4, so you're going to leave with that. We'll do a short lecture on Chapter 6, and then no reading assignment. When you come to class the next time, you're taking the midterm exam, so please do not forget our midterm exam is Tuesday, October 18th. You're going to come to class, turn in any assignments that are due, and then you're going to take the exam. When you've completed the exam, you'll be leaving, so there'll be no other class that night. Couple quick reminders on the midterm exam. It will be held Tuesday, October 18th. It begins promptly at 6 p.m. Please do not be late for the midterm exam. It is very distracting when people are trying to concentrate on their exam and people are walking into the class late and having to get an exam. Please do not be late for the midterm exam. This is a closed book, close note in exam. Honor code is in effect, which means you can only use the material that's inside your own head. You may not use cell phones or the internet or notes, textbook, another person, or anything else during the exam. You can use blank paper. A lot of people like to have blank paper to maybe jot down a few notes. Maybe you've memorized terms in a certain order and you want to get those on a piece of paper. That's totally fine. You can write things down during the exam, and I'll have blank paper with me if you want to use that. However, you may not use any notes, your laptop, or anything else during the exam. It's going to be 50 questions. It's going to be true, false, short answer, fill in the blank, things you're used to from the quizzes, no surprises there. You'll get your list of topics to study next week. Remember, your midterm exam is 20% of your course grade. 20% is huge. That is a fifth of your grade for this course. So please study for the midterm. If you have any questions while you're studying, two terms don't make sense, you can't tell the difference between this model and that model, there's something you got wrong on the first quiz and you don't understand why, please reach out to me when you're studying for the midterm so we can get you on the right track. You'll take the exam on Tuesday, October 18th. That following Monday, every instructor on campus is required to submit their midterm grades. If you're new to Hudson Valley, you get a final grade, of course, at the end of the semester, but we are also required to report your mid-semester grade. So most professors do their midterm exam, and that gives you a good idea of where you are halfway through the class. So I am required to return your mid-semester grade in to the registrar by October 24th, but I'll have them done before that. So if you want your mid-semester grade, if you want to know how you did on the midterm, just send me an email and I'll send your scores by email. Reminder about a transfer fair. A lot of you indicated on those informational sheets you filled out a couple weeks ago when we started class that you are interested in transferring. And this is that big transfer fair I told you about. So it's in the C Campus Center. That's where security is, the big bookstore. That's that great big building. The transfer fair is in there from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. the day after your midterm. You don't need to make an appointment. You don't need to call in advance. You can simply just show up. They usually have about 60 colleges and universities represented. I know it will definitely be over 40. It'll be local. It'll be a little farther away. It'll be SUNY. It'll be private. It'll be a little bit of everything. Really casual, friendly environment. Great way to just ask a couple questions. Or maybe you just want a brochure. Maybe you don't know if they have a criminal justice major, so you're not sure. Go ahead and ask them, right? Great time, real casual opportunity to talk to people from some other schools. Quick note on class projects. Please remember, and I actually tested you on this on the first quiz, you are required to submit 8 quizzes during this class, and you are required to submit 8 projects. Required. These are not optional assignments. So remember, if I give you a quiz or a project to do, it is required. You can submit the project late. I'll take it up to 10 days late. You'll get a deduction in points, but it's worth it because it is very difficult to overcome a 0. So if you have a missing project and it's still 10 or less days late, please get that into me. You can send it by email, you can hand it to me directly, whatever works faster. Remember that if you don't submit a project at all, you automatically get a 0. And zeros are very hard to overcome. So if you look at student X here, student X has done 4 projects. They got an 85 on the first 2 and an 80 on the third and fourth project. So they had an 83 average in the class. While student Y got the same exact scores, but they didn't submit project 2, so they got a 0. So student X has an 83, which is a B, and student Y has a 61, which is a D, and is almost failing because they missed just one assignment. So I want you to put that visual in your head that the difference between a B and a D is missing one project and getting a 0 on it. So just remember that. So even, getting a score and getting some points deducted for late is 100 times better than having a 0. That's really hard for you to overcome in your grade. So make sure those assignments are getting turned in. If you feel like you're falling behind, you need help, you need some study guidance, just let me know. But if we get to the end of the semester and you say, well, I didn't submit one of the projects, can I have extra credit? My answer is going to be no. I will not offer extra credit to make up for a 0. I will only give you extra credit to improve a score that you earned. And I also noted that in my syllabus, so you folks have had fair warning on that one. So please get required work in. If it absolutely has to be late, that's fine. It's much better than not turning in work at all. Another reminder about projects, you really should be using office.com. You have free access to all Microsoft products, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all the Office products are free. I strongly recommend you use it for your writing assignments for this course, even if it's doing the take-home quiz and you're writing down vocabulary words. Even more importantly, when you're writing one of the projects, it has the best editing tools. It is going to improve your score because it's going to highlight both typographical and grammatical errors, so you'll have a chance to fix those before I grade them. It's reliable, and it doesn't require any extra steps to me to review your work. A lot of students still using Google Docs. I'm not sure why. It's not reliable. It will let you make spelling errors. It will let you make grammatical errors and not even point them out to you. So you'll think your paper looks pretty good when in fact it's not going to score very well. And when you use Google Docs, you have to give me access to get your paper. Most students can't find my address, my email address within Google Docs, so it goes to my personal email. It goes to a nonprofit organization I work with. And if I don't see your paper, you're not getting credited. So strongly, strongly recommend just use Word products. Go to office.com, sign in using your Hudson Valley username and password. That's expensive software, and you have the most up-to-date versions of it for free. So please use them. All right, now let's get back to some course material. We talked last week about how many police officers and police agency are in New York State, and there's thousands, right? Because we have villages in New York State. Some villages have police departments, some don't. We have thousands of towns in New York State. Some towns have their own police departments, some don't. Every city in New York State must have a police department. You say, well, what is or isn't a city? It's defined by law, right? You don't have to worry about it. But if it's the city of Albany, they must have their own paid police department. Likewise, if it's the city of Oneida, which only has 3,000 people, it must have a police department because it's a city. So whether you're a little tiny city or it's New York City, they have to have a paid police department, compared to villages and towns, which some have paid police and some don't. Every county in New York State has what? A sheriff's office, right? We have a sheriff in every county in New York State, including downstate. And what's really distinct about the sheriff's office? What special role or function do they serve in every county? They're police officers, I get that, but what else do they do? They are responsible for operating the jail in every county. That falls to the sheriff's office. And then, of course, we all know we have the New York State Police, which covers the entire state of New York. So when we have a case, like let's say there's a case of a man in Troy is suspected of building pipe bombs in his house. Very serious crime, right? He has all the materials to make pipe bombs. Maybe he's even threatened some people and says, I'm going to blow up your house, right? So who's going to investigate that? The man lives in Troy, New York. So who's going to investigate that? Well, we know it's going to be the City of Troy Police Department because he lives in the City of Troy. So obviously that police department's going to be involved in that case. But the Rensselaer County Sheriff's Office may also be involved. Remember, the Sheriff's Office covers the whole county of Rensselaer, so they also have jurisdiction over the City of Troy. Could also be the New York State Police. This is a very serious case. Pipe bombs, the New York State Police could become involved. The U.S. Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, it's now called, but we still call it the ATF, U.S. Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They are definitely getting involved, right? If somebody's making pipe bombs, I don't care if it's in Troy, New York, or in Oklahoma City, or Nome, Alaska. If someone in the United States is making pipe bombs, the U.S. Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, is definitely getting involved in that investigation. And you may even have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, involved with this, right? So that's 5 different police departments or 5 different law enforcement agencies involved with the same case. What if we had a major drug trafficking operation in Albany, New York? So now we're in the city of Albany. Well, we're definitely going to have the City of Albany Police Department because that's where this person is. We could also have the Albany County Sheriff's Office, the New York State Police, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and possibly the FBI. If drugs are being trafficked from one state to another, or the drug trafficking has any element of drugs being moved from one state to another, oftentimes large drug trafficking operations also involves human trafficking. So if human beings are being transported against their will from one state to another, the FBI could definitely get involved. A case like this, if there's human trafficking involved, even Homeland Security could be getting involved. So you could have a minimum of 5 and maybe even 6 or 7 different law enforcement agencies all involved with the same investigation. You can just get that that gets pretty complicated, right? And then it causes a problem called fragmentation. This is covered and defined in your textbook. I'd like you to spend some time reading about fragmentation in the textbook. So we talked about, the era of patronage policing and that it's moved up to like what we call the community policing era, right? We like police in their communities, walking the streets, knowing the communities, knowing the parks, knowing the more dangerous areas, knowing the people, getting to know the elderly people in the neighborhood, getting to know the teenagers in the community. So that's great that we have a village police department, a town police department, city department. That really allows for that localized community policing. But it can also cause fragmentation. And fragmentation is a lack of coordination amongst law enforcement agencies. It's an important term to remember. I'm telling you, I'm going to put it on your tests and exams. Fragmentation is a lack of coordination amongst law enforcement agencies. And that just makes sense, right? If you think about the ATF is involved in investigation, and the Troy Police Department, and the Rensselaer Sheriff's Office, and the state police, these people all have different chains of commands, different bosses, they report to different people. They may not even use some of the same computer systems. They may have different systems they use between the state and the feds and the county. So how are they communicating? They're all investigating. What are they all in the same scene of the crime in the same bedroom stepping on each other and you got 40 law enforcement officers in one room? That clearly can't work, right? It's not effective and it's not efficient. And that's what happens when you have too many law enforcement agencies working on the same case. We call it fragmentation. It's a lack of coordination. So the law enforcement agencies aren't communicating with each other or dividing duties. They're all working on the same part of a case, which means other parts aren't getting worked on at all, right? So this is not good. This is not efficient, and nor does this provide really good public safety. So think of it as you have all these different law enforcement agencies, and each one has some of the pieces to the same puzzle. So maybe the ATF knows, really detailed information about the bomb, the pipe making stuff, the bomb making stuff, is testing it, testing the materials, testing the ignition devices, comparing them to devices used in other criminal cases that are still ongoing. So they know all about that. But it's really going to be like Troy PD who really knows this community and probably this person and this neighborhood and who else may be involved with this, because they're the local guys, so they know what's going on locally. But in order to solve this case and successfully prosecute this crime, we need them all to communicate and work together. And fragmentation is when that doesn't happen because you have too many law enforcement agencies that aren't effectively coordinated or sharing information with each other. So what are the solutions to that? Well, one is don't have all these little tiny agencies. Don't have the village and the town and the county and the state and the feds, and right? Don't have them all. Consolidate them into fewer agencies. That's one solution. It's easier to communicate within one agency than between agencies. So one solution is to consolidate. One thing that can happen with smaller agencies is they can't afford fancy equipment, right? I'm sure the town of Brunswick doesn't have the ability to test DNA. So the smaller agency can contract. They can have a contract with like the state police agency. So they don't have to have their own DNA lab. They can use the big guys, lab. So you can consolidate agencies. You can have smaller agencies that use the larger guys only for like testing and specialized equipment, right? So you can imagine if the village of Altamont, which is tiny, needs a helicopter, they don't have a helicopter. Say they're trying to search for somebody who's lost. Who are they going to call? They're going to call the state police because the state police has a helicopter. So that's one way to do it, is only use another agency for a very specific person. So if a crime happens in Albany, then the Albany police are responsible for investigating the crime, and while they may reach out to the state police for a helicopter or a DNA lab, they maintain primary control of the investigation. The other solution, the first one, is to consolidate agencies and have less agencies. And there's no right or wrong answer here, right? There's good parts and bad parts and advantages and disadvantages. Any way you do this, there's no perfect solution. So think about where the city of Troy is, and you're now a politician, you're an elected official, and one of your challenges is to improve law enforcement response in this area. And you say, all right, we have a fragmentation problem. We've got too many police agencies. We've got Cohoes, we've got Brunswick, we've got Waterville Elite. We have paid police in North Greenbush. We've got Post and Kill, which is little and further away. And we've got all these different agencies. We're not communicating well. We're not working effectively. What could we do to fix this? And you make a decision as an elected official, and let's say you get real creative and you say, let's get rid of the City of Troy Police Department altogether, because they only cover the city of Troy. And we're not having enough success solving crimes and providing, public safety and crime prevention in all these other areas. So let's get rid of the City of Troy Police Department and create one big agency. Get rid of all this town, all the village, all the county. Get rid of it all and have one agency that covers this whole area. Will that solve your problem of fragmentation? Yes, because you'll have one big agency and it's easier to communicate within the same agency. So that solves your fragmentation problem. That's an advantage. But what disadvantage does it create? Remember, there's no perfect solution here. Well, one of the disadvantages, you're losing your community policing. If you just have one big station in Troy that covers this whole area all the way north to Cohoes and all the way south to Post and Kill, you don't have officers in those communities getting to know the people who live there, getting to know the teenagers, knowing the parks, the schools, the shopping malls, right? Knowing all the things they need to know from being day to day in a community. And if they're based in Troy and they're driving to Post and Kill for an emergency, they may be able to get around the city of Troy in like 4 minutes, but they can't get to Post and Kill in less than 20 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on traffic and weather. So that's way too long for somebody in Post and Kill to wait for a 911 response. Imagine being in an emergency. Waiting 20 minutes would feel like 3 days. So an advantage to you consolidating and having one big agency is you have better communication, better sharing of information, and less fragmentation. A disadvantage is you're losing your community policing, right? Is one better than the other? Depends on how you feel about it, right? There's no perfect answer. There's no right or wrong. Textbook does a really good job talking about fragmentation, advantages, disadvantage of consolidating, and contracting for services. Please spend some time in the textbook with this. Let's change topics a little bit and talk about recruitment of police officers. How do police officers get hired, and how do we choose the best police candidate? And what are the characteristics that we're looking for? So what qualities do you need to be an effective police officer? These are just a few of the ones that are important. There's many, many qualities we'd like in a police officer, but probably the 5 big ones are: police officers need to be excellent communicators, both verbally, in email, in every way, non-verbally, right? Non-verbal communication is very important with police officers. They have to be good communicators. A person who does not like resolving disputes, a person who doesn't like to talk to people, a person who's very, very painfully shy is not the best candidate to be a police officer. Police officers' number one most important skill is their ability to communicate with other people. By far, that's the most important skill. But police officer candidates also have to have excellent writing and computer skills. We all know that a lot of their job's been computerized, right? They may still take handwritten notes on a notepad while they're talking to someone, but their computer skills are obviously very important in any job these days, right? They also need to have decent writing skills. We talked about that either last week or the week before, that a police officer's ability to document what they saw, heard, did is incredibly important. And a trial can be won or lost on a police officer's ability to create a written record. It's extremely important that police officers have that attention to detail and understand the importance of everything they write. Of course, we also want police officers to have some level of physical fitness. They don't need to be, the world's champion CrossFitter or anything like that, but we do need our police officers to be fit and to be healthy. It doesn't do any good to have a police officer chasing someone who can run 20 feet and run out of breath, and then the offender runs away, right? We need our police officers to be fit, to be strong, to be able to deal with the challenges of police work. It takes a lot of stamina to work an 8-hour shift plus 4, 5, 6 hours of overtime. Police officers conducting an investigation may have to stay up for 12, 15, 24 hours and stay awake and be alert. You got to be healthy and you got to be strong to be able to do that. So they need a certain level of both physical and mental fitness. You got to have stamina to be a police officer. One thing that we've been talking a lot about in the law enforcement community in the last 5 years or so is integrity, and that we want our police officer candidates to be honest and to be fair. People who have some moral compass, who don't just believe in crime prevention, but also in protecting our system and people's individual and collective constitutional rights. So people who are both honest and fair. You can be honest and fair and still be tough on crime. You can be tough on crime in an honest and fair way. And crucially important that our police officer candidates and police officers have stable mental health. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. We all have bad days, bad times. We could all become depressed or anxious. That's not what I'm talking about. You're allowed to be a human being and be a police officer. They're not RoboCops, right? They're human beings. But we do need our police officer candidates and our law enforcement officers on the job to have stable mental health. So part of stable mental health is if you're having a problem, getting help for it, right? Nobody minds a police officer who has an issue who goes and gets help for it. That's exactly what they should do. But people who are in denial that they're having a difficult time mentally, people who know they need help but refuse to accept help, we don't need these people working in law enforcement. But here's the challenge. Think about you're the police chief. You are the chief of police at one of these agencies, and you have to hire more candidates to get through your academy and your training. How are you going to determine whether or not the person who applied for the job is an excellent communicator? How can you determine if they're honest or fair? And this is just a list of 5 things. You may say that there's 5, 10 or more other qualities that you feel are equally important. Well, how are you going to figure that out? You don't know these people. You didn't grow up with them. You've never met them before. They show up and say, I want to be a police officer. How the heck are you going to determine if this is a good candidate? Well, a lot of them is through academies and training, right? So you don't get to just go in and fill out an application and become a police officer, and this is why. You need a lot of intensive training to be an effective and safe police officer. Here's just an example. If you want to become a New York State police officer, you have to do all sorts of things first. You have to have a psychological test. You have to have a physical fitness test. You have to fill out a bunch of forms. You have to do a background investigation. You have to take an exam. There's all sorts of stuff you have to do. And then once you've gone through all that and they still want you, you have to go to the New York State Police Academy. The New York State Police Academy, the one that's located right down by SUNY Albany, is 1,079 hours of training just to get through the academy. You live there 5 days a week. You get to go home on weekends, but you are working there for over 40 hours a week, for 6 months. And you do nothing but study the law, study procedures, work on your physical fitness, work on your communication, work on really important skills like your firearm skills and using all the other equipment in addition to firearms that police officers use, which could be anything from a taser to a snowmobile, right? You have to be able to use all the equipment the state police has. So just think about that. For the next 6 months, you live away from home, you're away from your family, you're away from your friends, you're sleeping in like what looks like a really crappy college dorm, and it's paramilitary. It's basically boot camp. You are in a physical and academic boot camp for 6 months. So even after you've done the psychological test and the fitness test and taken the state police exam, you still have this to look forward to, right? But it's this important. So when you're the police chief and your boss, who's probably the mayor, tells you, look, you need to hire some new police officers, and I don't want just anybody off the street. I want quality police officers. They've done a lot of surveys to determine how do people become interested in police work. What makes someone say, I'm thinking about becoming a police officer? And what they've determined is the best recruiters for a police agency is people who already work there. Surveys have shown that 40% of all applicants to any law enforcement agency were prompted to apply by a friend or family member who already works for that agency. So if you ask a New York State police recruit, why did you apply to work here? Why do you want to become a trooper? About 40% of them are going to say, my mom works for the state police. My uncle's a trooper. My dad works in the crime lab, right? They're going to be people who family members have encouraged to join the organization. And it's an awful lot of them. It's almost half. Seek a job at that agency because a friend or family member already works there and has encouraged them to apply. So there's really your best sort of recruitment is your own employees, police chief. Surveys have also shown that an additional 20% of applicants to any law enforcement agency were prompted to apply by friends or family members who work for a different agency. So let's say you ask a Troy police officer, why did you apply to Troy PD? And they say, my mom works for the FBI and she thought, Troy PD would be a great opportunity for me, or she encouraged me to apply there. Or my cousin works for the Albany County Sheriff's Office and he encouraged me to apply to the Albany City Police Department. So 40 plus 20 is 60, which means that 60% of all people who apply to a law enforcement job were encouraged to do so by a friend or family member who works in law enforcement, right? Which also leads to this kind of generational law enforcement thing. I know this isn't a great quality photograph, but pictured here is a grandfather, a son, and a grandson who are all police officers at the San Diego, California Police Department. And this isn't uncommon. There's many police departments where somebody's uncle and somebody's dad and somebody's cousin and the kid you grew up with from high school are all in the same police department. So now you've got this pool of applicants. How are you going to select? You got 100 people who applied to work at your police agency. You're the chief of police. How are you going to pick? Who are you going to pick and who are you going to let go? So one of the issues you've got to address when you're the police chief is a lot of people are going to want to be police officers because what we talked about a couple weeks ago. I want to drive fast. I want to carry a gun. I want to tase people. I want to hunt down bad guys, right? That's what's attracting them to police work. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. Police work can be exciting, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging some aspects of it can be really exciting and fun, right? That's the truth. That's cool. But what makes you nervous about someone who says that's the only reason they want to be a police officer? Because it's so exciting. I get to race around in a car and carry a gun and tase people and chase bad guys. What is putting you off about that guy or that gal? What's making you say, yeah, I don't know about them? Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because of a very important statistic we covered last week, which is 80% of all police work has nothing to do with tasing people, shooting people, driving around fast in a car, or chasing bad guys, right? We talked about that. 80% of a police officer's job is directing traffic, dealing with weather emergencies. Can you imagine what law enforcement's doing in Florida right now? Do you think a lot of law enforcement officers on the west coast of Florida are solving crimes right now? No, they're trying to help literally millions of people living without power get through an emergency, while at the same time, their homes have been destroyed. So they're not solving crimes, they're helping people survive right now. We also talked about police officer work is running the DARE program in an elementary school and monitoring the concert at SPAC, right? It's not all chasing down bad guys, it's not all excitement. So one of my concerns about the guy or gal who really seems attracted to law enforcement because of this is you're not going to like it. If you think that's what it is, you're not going to enjoy being a police officer and you're probably not going to be that great at it. So here you can see a bunch of police recruits taking exams. Why do you want to test them? Why don't you just want to interview them, talk to them, ask them questions, get to know them? Why do you want to give them an exam? Well, part of the reason is because you're required to, right? Because most police agencies right now are in civil service systems that require a certain amount of written examination. But what do you want to test them on? What are you looking to get, police chief, out of these tests? Well, one is educational. We want to ensure that we maintain the professionalism of a police force. And while there may be many eighth graders who are mature, lovely eighth graders, we don't want them being police officers, right? They have not achieved the level of education yet that we want them to have to be out in the world and protecting and serving. So one is to maintain the professionalism of police force, you want them to achieve a certain level of education. Some law enforcement agencies may require a high school diploma, some may require a 2-year degree, some, I believe, like the FBI, require a 4-year degree. And you know who the FBI really likes? Candidates who have master's degrees in law or accounting, right? Some of them are even really hoping you come in with a master's degree. So we have a certain educational standard. We want people to meet that standard to maintain the professionalism of our police department. So part of this testing is ensuring that this person has a certain educational level. Physical testing, right? That's obvious. Again, we don't want police officers. I mean, imagine the physical stamina it takes right now for a police officer to be on the west coast of Florida. They're not getting any sleep. They're probably grabbing meals here and there as they can. They are doing incredibly difficult physical work. They are cutting up trees with chainsaws. They are trying to unearth people from debris. They're working in terrible conditions. You have to be in good physical shape to do that. I'd probably last down there for about 6 hours, and I'd be like taking a nap on a cot somewhere. Not particularly helpful. So you need to be strong physically to be an effective police officer. So there's going to be lots of physical tests and physical standards these recruits have to meet. And then we get into the mental health, psychological part. We want to ensure that these people are mentally stable. So how are you going to do that? Well, in the research project you guys did that you turned in with law enforcement, a lot of you wrote about your agency has psychological testing, and we can talk about that more in detail in class if you want. So exams and tests are very important. Educational exams, educational requirements, physical fitness testing, and psychological testing. So let's talk about minorities in law enforcement. And in fact, women aren't really a minority, but we'll discuss them in the same topic. So demographically, we'll look at, just for this slide, Black, Latinx, and women. So these stats are a little old. I should work on getting some newer stats for you. So in 2000, consider that about 14% of all people identify as Black. But then look at the chart above and see how many law enforcement officers are Black. It's about 11%. That's probably a great improvement over those statistics from 1960, 70, even 80 and 90. But about 17% of all people in the country identify as Latino in some form, and yet they are very poorly represented. So only 11% of all law enforcement officers about 10 years ago identified as Latin. So many more Latin people than we have Latin police officers. And with women, it's still particularly striking. Of course, 50 years ago, it was almost unheard of to have a female police officer. It's much more common now. But if you think about it, 50% of all people in the United States are women, and there's still only about 12 to 15% of all law enforcement. So law enforcement is predominantly male. There is no way to argue that even today. Some agencies more than others, but both federal, state, local, city law enforcement is still predominantly male, but yet half of all people are female. So spend some time with the material in the textbook about this because it talks about why it matters. Does it matter? Does it matter? Do we need 51% of all police officers to be female? Do we need that to be that strict? Does it matter? Do we need more of them, less of them? What difference does it make, right? What about other groups. Does it matter the percentage of black people we have in this country to the percentage of black police officers? Why does it matter? Why is it important? Why would it be important for a young black male to know a black law enforcement officer in his community who is kind and brave and fit? There might be a really good reason for that. So just think about that and spend some time with it in the textbook. Now we're going to do two of those terms. You know how I always warn you when terms are close together? So we're going to do a couple of those terms that you're going to have to be extra careful with. So we're going to talk about police subculture. That's the umbrella term, police subculture. We're going to talk about two different kinds. The first kind of police subculture we're going to talk about is police occupational subculture. Police occupational subculture is the norms and beliefs embraced by most police officers in any given country. So police occupational subculture is, what are the norms and beliefs held by most police officers in the United States or in France or in Canada? It's about police officers, law enforcement in a country, right? So police occupational subculture, let's focus on the United States. Here's some common things most police officers would agree on in the United States. That they have to perform very dangerous duty, whether it's helping somebody in a storm impacted by a hurricane, it's dealing with a mentally ill person who's armed with a firearm. It's dangerous work, whether they're doing public safety work or actually, doing crime prevention or crime solving. It's dangerous. Most police officers would agree on that. They have crazy work hours, crazy shift work, crazy overtime, working holidays, working nights, working all night, working 12, 15 hours straight. Police officers in the United States, by and large, and especially until you get up in the ranks and get more experience, the newer you are, the crazier your hours are. It could be very difficult to have a family. It could be very difficult to raise your children. Are you going to be able to go to your kid's ball game, right, if you're working these crazy hours? It's very stressful. I think every law enforcement officer in the United States would agree with each other that one of the norms of their job is that it is very stressful. There's also a very strong norm amongst United States police officers that they need to protect each other. It's often called the brotherhood in blue, right? They think of each other as a collective organization. And that, that's also training. Being trained in this very paramilitary way, through this boot camp style academies and rank and file it's us against them, right? It's us against them. So there's nothing wrong with any of this. I'm not saying there's anything bad about police officers in the United States understanding they have a stressful job. That's just a fact. But what you don't want it to lead to is this siege mentality, and that term's covered in your textbook, this siege mentality, where it's us against them to the point of police officers feel like the people they serve are the enemy. That's taking it to too far of an extreme that we don't want to go there. It is not police against everybody else at all costs. It's great to have a brotherhood, just like it's great to belong to any organization and feel like a member of a team. But that team is supposed to be serving people and protecting them. So if this leans so far that police officers feel like it's a war, us against them, the results of that are going to be deadly, really dangerous, and start chewing away at the fabric of our constitutionally protected rights. So that's police occupational subculture, which is norms and beliefs embraced by most police officers in a given country. Remember, occupational goes with country. It'll help you remember it. That is much different than police organizational subculture. Police organizational subculture is the norms and beliefs of a specific police department. So what norms and beliefs could be held by one police department and not another? What makes policing different in Albany as opposed to Saratoga or Troy? So police officers in Saratoga, it's a slightly more rural area. They also have SPAC, right? They've got the Saratoga Performing Arts Center. So people who police in that area may have a lot of concerns and feelings and work experience dealing with concerts, dealing with these massive events where thousands of people show up over a weekend, a lot of them carrying or using drugs, right? Parties, fights, that kind of crazy large event thing. That's part of their culture in Saratoga. It's also part of the organizational police subculture in Saratoga to have to deal with the racing track. We don't have a horse racing track in Albany. So all the issues that come out of thousands of people coming for 6 weeks in the summer for the track creates a lot of issues. So that's part of the culture of the police department in Saratoga that maybe police officers in Troy have no idea what that's like because they don't have a track and they don't have, by and large, these huge concerts in Troy. But maybe the police officers in Troy, because of their organizational subculture, have different concerns, right? For one thing, Troy's located on the water. You have to deal with things involving the river, drownings, things being trafficked up and down the river, boating. Well, not so much in Saratoga, right? So different geographic, different demographic things change a police organizational subculture. One thing that really changes them is the amount of college students in any area, right? A place that's really dominated by college students creates a different culture in a community compared to a police officer who works in an area where there's literally no college students. It's just different, right? It's not right or wrong, it's just different. Being a police officer in the Bronx is much different than being a police officer in Binghamton. That's two very different jobs. So you have a subculture by country, which is called the occupational subculture, and you have subcultures by organization, and that's by the specific police department. So please make sure you don't confuse those two terms. And then we have what is routinely referred to as the blue code of silence or the blue wall or the blue wall of silence. Our textbook uses blue code of silence. And the blue code of silence refers to police officers adhering to a code of conduct that places loyalty to each other above any other value. So this is police officers living and working in a way where to them the most important thing is their relationship to their fellow police officers and not to the community that they serve or the people in that community. So why does this occur? Well, part of it can come from that siege mentality, right? We're always getting attacked in the press, no matter what we do or wrong. They never talk about how we help people. They never talk about the old lady we rescued or the kid that we found in the woods. They never talk about that. It's only the negative. It's only when something goes wrong. They focus on one truly crappy officer and the media pays no attention to the 100 really good officers. That kind of thing can create a real us against them attitude. You also have the safety issue contributes to this. Now, I feel like the other professors on the college look out for me. If I need something, if I'm having trouble with a student, I want to talk to a professor and say, how would you handle this student? That's great. They can help me out with that. Maybe I can say, I'm looking at a new textbook for my course. How did you find your textbook? And we can work together and help each other out. But those other professors are not responsible for saving my life. They are not responsible for protecting me during the commission of a crime. They are not going to make life or death decisions. So I'm not relying on them to save my life. I just might rely on them every once in a while for some good advice or further experience. It's a whole nother thing whose coworker is responsible for making sure you don't die. So that also creates more of that military-like bond, like you're actually relying on your coworker to prevent you from being shot to death. That also leads to that us against them mentality. So an officer who has to choose between doing the right thing to a community member or doing the right thing by a law enforcement officer may choose the law enforcement officer over a victim or over a member of a community or over an offender, because their loyalty lies with their fellow police officers. And this happens in lots of subcultures. It's not just, in police work. It can happen in lots of organizations. It can happen on a sports team. We've seen terrible thing happen, down to the level of high school sports where people get involved in hazing and hurting other people, bullying other people, even causing the death of other people. And they say, "Why didn't you tell anybody?" And they say, "We're on the same team. He's my teammate. I can't," right? Snitching, right? That's the whole concept of snitching. I'm not going to turn somebody into the police who lives in my neighborhood because we don't do that. That's a subculture. That's a value of a subculture. We don't rat on each other to the police is a subculture. So this protect your own at the cost of all others isn't new, and it's not just with police officers. It happens in lots of subcultures. But it's really dangerous when it happens in the police world, right? Because we're relying on police officers to protect people's constitutional rights. And if they're going to put each other over other people's constitutional rights, there's going to be a lot of really negative, serious, and even deadly consequences for that. But because of the nature of their work, we have to give police officers discretion. No one can follow a police officer around all day and go, okay, give her a warning, give him a ticket, arrest him, don't arrest him, right? We need police officers just go out in the community and do their job and do it correctly. And they get a lot of discretion. Discretion is just the authority to act in a manner most appropriate for any given situation, right? We all know what discretion is. So I have a lot of discretion as a professor. Every professor at Hudson Valley gets to set their own attendance policy, which means that a professor could say, if you ever miss one of my classes, you fail. I don't think one would do that, but you know what? They're allowed to. We have complete discretion to set our own attendance policy. So my attendance policy is if you miss more than 2 court classes at Criminal Justice 101, you can't complete the course. That's my policy. Another professor who teaches this class may say, I don't care if they come or don't come, that's up to them. I don't care if they miss all the classes. If they fail, they fail. If they come, they come. We all get our own discretion. That also comes with assignment submission, right? I have the discretion to say, you're going to print it out and turn it into class. You're going to send it by email. You're going to send it by Blackboard. That's up to me. And how I respond to cheating is largely up to me. Some instructors may just refer you to the Judicial Conduct Committee. Some instructors may want to work with you first. Some may go, I don't care if they cheat, it's not my problem. They're only missing out on their own education. I don't really care that they cheat. Right? We get discretion. Every professor at the college has some discretion on how we deal with attendance, assignments, class requirements, and cheating. And that's a good thing, right? We're the one working with you. We're the one who see you and know you, so we should have some discretion. And it's our class, right? Why do we give police officers discretion? Well, the textbook talks about 2 really focused situations on this. The first is because there are too many laws for every law to be enforced all of the time. So police officers who are in the situation must be able to choose which law to enforce and when. Okay? There's too many laws. If you just look at the New York State Vehicle and Traffic Law, it's a book. It's the thickness of a novel. Can every police officer enforce every vehicle and traffic regulation every minute of the day, their entire shift? No, it's impossible. So we need police officers to be able to evaluate a situation, determine which law to enforce and when. That's one reason. The other is every law and every police department policy isn't written perfectly, right? Laws and policies are created by human beings, and human beings are imperfect. So a law may be vague. A police officer may not be able to determine, does this law apply to this situation? So we need to give police officers the discretion because they're the one standing there, they're the one with the facts in front of them, and we need them to make decisions quickly. And I want you to keep this photograph in your mind of all these cars in these lanes next to each other. So there's positive aspects of police discretion. One is it allows officers to act in the fairest manner in a particular situation. So for example, officer on patrol sees somebody drive through a stop sign. They pull them over. As they're approaching the car, they see the driver's clearly upset. He's been crying. His face is red. He looks really sad. He says to the guy, "What's going on?" He says, "My wife died this morning." Let's say you're the police officer. What are you going to do? You saw a guy go through a stop sign. He just told you his wife died this morning. You going to give him a ticket? Or are you going to give him a warning? What are you going to do? Either one is correct. You're allowed to give him a ticket. He went through a stop sign. Or you may use your discretion and go, "You know what, I'm going to give this guy a break." And you're going to go, "Look, I'm really sorry to hear about your wife. I need you to pay attention. Maybe you should ask somebody to drive you. This is obviously a really upsetting time. Maybe you shouldn't be driving. And I understand why you'd be distracted, but maybe it's really not the best of you to be driving right now." Or maybe just say, "I'm really sorry to hear that, and I really need you to be careful. The last thing your family needs is for you to go through a stop sign and get hit by a car right now." Right? We don't want you creating yet another situation your family has to deal with. It's really hard. So it's really important for you to be careful. And you give them a warning. Or maybe you give them a ticket. That's up to you, right? You have the discretion as the police officer to do that. So allowing police officers to have discretion lets them act in the fairest manner possible in a particular situation. And it also allows officers to determine the best way to focus their time and energy. So remember this photograph of all the cars? Now, we know there's hundreds of vehicle and traffic laws and regulations. Can you enforce all of them against all of those drivers at the same time? You're one police officer in one police car. How are you possibly going to do that? So if you're patrolling this area, I'm guessing you're going to be looking for somebody who's in danger, right? If somebody's broken down, if somebody's car is stuck, you're going to definitely want to address that and make sure you can get the car off the road and that no one hits them. As far as enforcement, you may be looking for people who are creating the biggest dangers, right? If somebody's weaving out of these traffic lanes really fast and they're almost hitting people, you're going to want to pick him up off the street. If they're look like they're having some sort of medical emergency, they're driving 5 miles per hour, and you get over there and it looks like they're having a heart attack, right? As a police officer, you're going to have to say, what's most important right this second? And who should I be focusing on right this second? You can't enforce all the laws right now at this time. It's impossible. You're just one person. So discretion allows police officers to determine where to focus their time and energy right now in this second. What are some negative aspects of police discretion? And there are many. One is discrimination and racial profiling, right? Instead of a police officer using his or her discretion to decide what's the most important thing right now, they do it to effectuate their own feelings of hatred towards someone's gender, their ethnic group, their religion, their nationality, whatever it is, right? So we certainly don't want police officers saying, "Well, if you're white, I never give white guys a ticket. I only give black guys a ticket." Obviously, that's discriminatory. That's against the law. That's not how we want police officers using their discretion. What would be a fair use of discretion is, the first time I pick up a teenager for driving through a red light, I give them like the serious lecture. Everybody who goes through that red light the first time, they're getting a lecture. If I get them again, they're getting a ticket. That's a fair use of discretion, right? Because it's talking about treating everybody fairly. Everybody gets one pass on the red light, but the next time they're getting a ticket. Abuse of a power and authority. Using a police officer using his or her position in law enforcement to intimidate, to frighten, to scare, to threaten, to harass, right? That's certainly not how we want them using their discretion. Police discretion also allows some offenders who violate the law to avoid punishment, right? So a lot of people who believe in a much more tough on crime perspective, they don't want anybody getting warnings. They don't want anybody getting a second chance. If you do something wrong, they want you to get the ticket. If you committed a crime, they want you getting arrested. So a lot of people have a very tough on crime or crime control perspective aren't big fans of police discretion because guilty people get to go free here, right? If the cop gives you a warning, you get a get out of jail free card, right? And some people don't like that. So to properly use discretion, we need police officers who are intelligent, ethical, and honest. That's how you properly use discretion, is if you're intelligent, ethical, and honest. But what if you're not? What if the police officer is racist or mentally unstable? Do you want them to have discretion? Well, we don't. But there's a lot of positive aspects of police discretion, which is why your job being the police chief is going to be really difficult. Police corruption is a big problem. Police corruption occurs when an officer engaged in misconduct for personal gain. Okay? That sounds like a vocabulary term I'm going to test you on, doesn't it? It is. Police corruption occurs when a police officer engages in misconduct for personal gain. And I put personal gain in bold there because the police officer is getting something for their misconduct. Usually money, right? It could also be drugs. It could also be like getting to be the big shot cop. And we're going to talk about that. I'll talk about the New York State Troop C scandal, which happened in my hometown the next time we're together live. But police corruption occurs when an officer engages in misconduct for personal gain. They are getting something out of their corruption, right? So again, words that can get confusing. Corruption, examples of police corruption is stealing money. Police officer goes to a drug bust. There's $15,000 on a dresser. They take $10,000, put it in their pocket, and they put $5,000 in the evidence bag. That is clear corruption. Dealing drugs. We had quite a cops dealing drug scandal in the Schenectady Police Department a couple years back. That is corruption. Refusing to report unlawful or unprofessional officer conduct. So police corruption is knowing that one of your fellow officers shot someone when they shouldn't and not reporting it. That is an example of police corruption. Working lots of overtime and getting paid for it, and then finding out, yeah, that officer didn't actually work all that overtime. They were home watching Netflix. They said they were working. They were not. That is an example of police corruption. And obviously accepting bribes. That would be an obvious example of police corruption. That is a much different thing, as far as our terminology, from abuse of authority. So abuse of authority is discrimination, racial profiling, unjustified shootings, or just generally misusing their direction. So abuse of authority isn't done for personal gain. That's the difference, right? Police corruption, the cops getting something, money, drugs, getting to be, the big shot, cash, vacation time, right? That's corruption. Abuse of authority, think more discrimination, profiling, unjustified shootings, misuse of discretion. So what is integrity? What is what we want? We know what we don't want, which is abuse of authority, right? And corruption. What do we want? What we want is integrity. Integrity is simply a firm adherence to a code of moral values. And we all show integrity, amongst our family, our coworkers, our classmates, our romantic partners, our friends, our neighbors. We all desire to have people in our life who have integrity. They don't tell our secrets. They don't throw us under the bus. They take care of us. They're there when we need their help, right? We want those same qualities in a police officer. So how do we get police integrity? How do we accomplish it? We know that's what we want. How do we get it? Well, there's a couple theories, a couple ways, a couple methods in your textbook about how to obtain police integrity. Police integrity is defined as moral principles and professional standards that help officers resist the temptation to abuse their authority. So it's standards and principles that help an officer put in a sticky situation to choose to do the right thing. So they're offered a bribe, for example. Somebody says, look, I'll give you $100 to look the other way. Don't arrest me. Don't give me a ticket. In that moment, how can we get that police officer to do the right thing? Well, it's achieved by 4 ways. We got 4 different methods. One is management, which is higher ranking officers demonstrating ethical behavior, higher ranking officers showing their own strict adherence to the rules, whether it be evidence collection, storage, accounting for everything they take from a scene. Management can reward officers who do the right thing. and management can speak out very strongly against corruption and abuse of discretion. So that's one way we can obtain police integrity, is through the management of that police department. The chief, the assistant chief, the captains, the sergeants, the lieutenants, the highest ranking officer, both demonstrating that behavior themselves and demanding that behavior from the people in their chain of command. Another way to obtain police integrity is through early warning systems. This is procedures put into place to identify officers early who are having struggles and who are having problems, and solving those problems before they get really bad. So how do they do it? Well, they use a lot of data. Use of force. How many times does that officer use force compared to this other officer on a different shift? How many times has that officer done a vehicle pursuit compared to these other officers? How many complaints are they getting? Has this officer gotten 25 complaints in the last 6 months, while every other officer only averaged 1 complaint in 6 months? That's indicative that this guy or this gal has a problem, right? So let's look at it, let's figure it out, and let's solve it early. Departments that use early warning systems find them to be very effective, right? So you have an officer just out of the academy. She's been working for you for 6 weeks. Do you think it's easier to correct her behavior or an officer who's been on the job for 15 or 20 years, right? Ever see the movie Training Day with Denzel Washington? It's much easier to correct a new officer's behavior than a guy who's been getting away with stuff for 20 years. So if you get new officers on the right path early, and if they start to sway or show some kind of sketchy conduct, getting them right back into the fold and getting them on the right track, you'll have a much easier time. Legitimacy and procedural justice. Legitimacy is a measure of how much a community trusts their law enforcement and how willing they are to comply with them or defer to their authority. Legitimacy. Police chiefs, city managers, mayors need to be looking at communities and seeing how much faith that community has in their law enforcement, right? Communities that have high levels of trust in their law enforcement probably have a lot of very honorable, fair police officers. Doesn't mean they don't have a few rotten ones here and there, but by and large, people go, yeah, the police department's pretty good. You know, they got our backs, they help us out when we need them, and there may be a couple crummy ones, but most of them are pretty fair. That's legitimate. That's legitimacy in a police department. So if you find, examining a community that have very little faith in their law enforcement, you probably have police officers who are abusing their authority and who are corrupt. Procedural justice is when an officer explains what the officer is doing and why, and gives the person they're talking to an opportunity to explain his or her side of the story. This is huge. It seems like a minor thing, but it's probably one of the most important ways to improve a community's faith in a police department. A lot of times, like if you watch Cops or Live PD, a police officer arrests someone, and the person will say, "Why am I getting arrested? I don't understand. I did wrong. Why do you have me in handcuffs? Why are you getting to the police?" And the police officer says, "I don't have to tell you anything. I don't have to tell you. Just do what I say. I don't have to tell you anything." Well, maybe in some situations you don't have time to explain, or it's not safe to take that moment to explain. But an awful lot of times, police officers could solve a lot of problems by just explaining what they're doing. I have to put you in handcuffs for my own personal safety until I determine you don't have a gun. Once I've determined you don't have a gun, I can take the handcuffs off. And you'll see people relax and go, "Oh, all right, he just needs to make sure I don't have a gun." Then you'll see somebody relax. Imagine how it's getting more heightened and argumentative when a person's asking questions. The cop's going, "I don't have to tell you anything. I don't have to explain anything to you," right? That's not helpful. That goes back to communication. Just explain why you're doing things. Somebody's going, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" I don't understand. You go, "Sir, I'm sorry. I can't explain it to you right now. If you give me 5 minutes, I'll come back here and tell you exactly what I'm doing. Just give me 5 minutes, and I will. I will come back here and explain it to you." That takes tempers down. That gets people to calm down. Just explain what you're doing, right? And giving that person to tell their side, right? If you're going to arrest somebody, if you're questioning someone, give them 5 seconds to explain their side of the story. Even if you don't believe them, even if you think it's a bunch of hogwash, give them a minute to explain their side of the story. It brings tempers down. It makes law enforcement safer for both police officers and members of the community, and it puts more faith in the police, right? Even though you got arrested, you're like, well, he explained to me what he was doing and he gave me 5 minutes to explain my side. You're going to feel better about that interaction. And lastly, another way to maintain police integrity is using formal mechanisms for detecting and investigating misconduct. So that's like your internal affairs bureaus, citizen review boards, and independent auditors who come from outside the police department to examine how officers are behaving in the community. All right, that's the end of our lecture. So here's what you've got for next week. Please come to class live next week. I appreciate you watching a video this week, but please come back live. When you come, please bring your take-home quiz typed out. You will also be assigned project number 3 this week, so you have a new project to do. So finish up that take-home quiz. You have a new project. I'm going to send you the instructions by email. So make sure you check your email and get the project instructions. I'll also put them on Blackboard. You also will be having quiz 4. You are taking a quiz when you show up to class next Tuesday, the 11th. Please be ready for a quiz on corpus delicti, actus reus, and mens rea, and on the 7 defenses: intoxication, necessity, insanity, mistake of fact, duress, self-defense, and entrapment. We did a little self-quiz, a little surprise self-quiz in class last week where I gave you scenarios and you had to write the right defense. It'll look like that. So make sure you can recognize those defenses. For corpus delicti, actus reus, and mens rea, I'm going to have you look at a crime and you're going to have to select what is the actus reus and what is the mens rea. So nothing real hard. We did it in class. You got lots of information to study on that if you have any questions. So for next week, please come to class live. Bring your take-home quiz that was assigned last week, typed out all those vocabulary terms. Bring project number 3 with you. The instructions will be sent to your email. And get prepared for quiz 4, corpus delicti, actus reus, mens rea, and your defenses. Note you don't have a reading assignment. I'm not giving you any textbook reading this week, so please work hard on your project, your take-home quiz, and project number 3. As always, any questions or anything, just send me an email.